see that next sentence. For what are we born if not to aid one another? For what are we born if not to aid one another? In other words, again, interdependency. That is part of Hemingway, but you really have to live. And you know from this book, only bullfighters live life all the way to the hilt. But everyone makes much about the fact of the way Hemingway lived. I mean, he lived with gusto. Hemingway just lived. And it's absolutely essential to live. This is the positive aspect of Hemingway's preoccupation with death. You'll understand, I think, more and more as you go into Hemingway, the reason what death does for Hemingway is that it does not make him despair. What it does for so many people, and particularly I think of a lot of French writers in the 20th century, it gives a tremendous power and zest to life. Because you're so conscious of it, you know, all of the time. A comment along that line, because everyone usually has trouble. If I read papers and examinations, what I get for the most part back, you know, what you don't like about Hemingway, you don't like the way he talks about death. I get nothing, you know. This is what most students or readers seem to reject, or at least what I pick up a lot. But on this business about being positively motivated, Heidegger, the German philosopher, he has a marvelous statement in one of his works. And he says, as soon as a baby is born, it's old enough to die. As soon as a baby is born, it's old enough to die. Which, when you think of that ultimate fact of human existence, is kind of amusing, isn't it? When you say to an 8-year-old, you know, well, you're not old enough, you know, to stay up and watch TV after 10 o'clock, but you're old enough to die. And the distinction behind this kind of Heidegger sort of thing, who had a lot to do with existentialism, and it came on later, was the distinction between life as an eventuality and death as a possibility. Death as an eventuality and death as a possibility. Now, you and I, for the most part, we all know that death is an eventuality. And what that means is that it's down the road for the most part. And that's where you and I put it and leave it. But men like Heidegger and existentialisms and Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, they insist that you and I consider death as a possibility and not as an eventuality. And if you and I will learn to consider death as a possibility, we will live 2 or 3 lifetimes in one lifetime to those people who just consider death an eventuality. And so this is the positive aspect of Hemingway's encounter at such an early age with death. You got to find a certain way to live in a certain way in view of this particular, you know, possibility.
Now, unfortunately, from, you know, the course description that you've read and what you're going to find out this week and in subsequent weeks, you are going to have to come up with products, a product. And in a sense, that's unfortunate. Because process really is so much more important than product. You know that process is more important. I mean, every morning that you get up, whatever you do and go to work, you go through repeated processes all the time, don't you? At the breakfast table, in the kitchen, when you go to the office. And also when you think about it, this process or these processes tend to weigh heavily on you. They can be extremely discouraging. They're killers, or can be. That's because they're repeated processes, and they seem to be meaningless. You know, like getting the dishes dirty, putting them in the sink, cleaning them, drying them off, putting them back in the cupboard, taking them out of the cupboard, back again to get dirty. That's a repeated process. And there are so many repeated processes in our lives that seem to go nowhere that it can become discouraging, but these have to be, if you like, repeated. Another problem is when we talk about creative process and the distinction of the creative process of product, is that Western civilization is a product-oriented civilization. We worship Florence. That's where we all want to go. That's where all the products of Western civilization are just on display, and we all go down there, you know, to genuflect and so on. And we're always talking about the gross national product, and we're talking about productivity and so on. And you are constantly beaten and badgered, are you not, to come up with one product after the other. And I'm almost sorry, you know, that I have to say that you have to do that a little bit in this course. Because I don't believe in this. I don't believe in gross national products, and I'm not very keen on Florence, as a matter of fact, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or any other museum. These are sort of just hot houses, if you like, you know, of Western culture where we put up artifacts. And there's a problem in that.
I don't know if you have come across all kinds of essays or something of things that have talked to you about the problem of abstractions. So much the problem of abstractions that I have heard people talk, or I have read things that, as a matter of fact, talks about, you know, the evil of abstractions. And abstractions are words like love, God, liberty, justice, equality. All of these are abstractions. Patriotism. And many, many people consider these to be one of the most misleading and twisting types of words that can happen to human existence. You go back to A Farewell to Arms, Hemingway's book in there, and he says, the words honor no longer interest me, dignity, justice. And Lieutenant Henry says, what I like the names of the signs on the roads. I like the names of rivers. I like the names of those things. I'm not going to use any of these words anymore. Let me try to put some more teeth into this to you, just a little bit. Once I got into class, and someone used the word family values. You're going to laugh. She puts it across there. Family values. And I had to say, because the context was just right, I just said, and maybe I was trying to trick the person, but I was a bit overly cynical, I don't think, at the time. But I said, you know, I've been hearing that phrase for a long time. Do you happen to know how many of those there are? Are there 6 family values, or 9, or 11? Can you tell me what they are? You know, how many are there? And so, this person, male, came up with one. And the class got going, and I never had to say a word. And that class had a discussion for 15 minutes. And you know what they decided, every man and woman in this class? They decided that there is no such thing as family values. They tested it, in other words, concretely. Because someone said, you know, well, you know, family like that, you know, you pull out the word love. You know, and so then someone gets going, well, you know, you mean like love of God? You mean, well, you know, I got the love for my cat. And love came out in all sorts of particular ways. You mean, you mean like the love of 2 teenagers for one another, 16 years old. In other words, what they discovered was that the value that was in the family could be found anywhere else in society. Well, fidelity and loyalty. Do you know what some guy came up, I remember he was back, he says, oh boy, he said, I was in this gang back in Detroit. That was one of our key words, loyalty to everyone in the street gang. The loyalty that kind of, that made you go and kill the other guys on the other side, you know, and so on. So they discovered, anyway, that every family value can be found someplace else in society. Okay. And this is what happens when you take an abstraction and you make it concrete. It's like the bumper sticker, right? Love is the answer. Just run up to the person and say, excuse me, can you tell me what the question is? Okay? Or even if you have God as the answer, what is the question? One particular way. But what happens with abstractions is that someone will come up to you and say, are you a patriot? Are you patriotic? You're going to say, well, of course I'm patriotic. You know? But when you get down to what does it mean to be patriotic, but there's another thing. Here's what you do. What does a patriot do in action? If you want to say what is love, you know, I've had people play that. I've passed out a sheet of paper around, you know. Yeah. What is love? And give me an answer. And a lot of people say emotion and stuff like that, and then I read them off to all the class one way or the other, and I always get one that says, love is hell. Always get one that's love is hell.